The history of slavery in America is among the most painful chapters of the human story. It is a history built on the forced labor, degradation, and dehumanization of millions of Africans and their descendants. We know well of the whips, the chains, the auction blocks, and the brutality of slaveholders. We also know of the incredible resilience, resistance, and cultural survival of enslaved people in the face of such overwhelming oppression. But hidden within this broader narrative are aspects less frequently discussed, stories deliberately silenced or left on the margins. Today, we will explore one of those rarely told truths, the abuse of enslaved black men by planter-class white women in the Antebellum South. Their roles in slavery are often sanitized in popular memory, cast as helpless belles or passive bystanders. But the historical record reveals something far darker and more complex. To uncover this history, we must first situate ourselves in the antebellum era, the period before the Civil War, a time of immense change, conflict, and contradiction in American life. The word antebellum comes from Latin, meaning before the war. In American history, it refers to the decades before 1861, the year the Civil War erupted. This was a period marked by rapid growth, transformation, and deepening division. The United States was expanding westward, adding new states and territories, each one raising the question, would slavery spread there or be prohibited? In the South, cotton had become king. The cotton gin, invented in the 1790s, made short staple cotton profitable, and the global demand for the crop skyrocketed. The prosperity of the South rested squarely on the backs of enslaved laborers. By 1860, nearly 4 million people were enslaved in the United States, the majority of them in the cotton fields. At the same time, abolitionist voices were growing louder. Newspapers, pamphlets, and speakers condemned slavery as a moral evil. Escaped enslaved people published narratives exposing its horrors, but Southern leaders dug in their heels. Instead of portraying slavery as a temporary necessity, they began defending it as a divinely ordained institution, one essential to their way of life. This volatile mix of expansion, economic reliance, and moral conflict set the stage for the nation's bloodiest conflict. Yet while debates raged in Congress and on the campaign trail, life on the ground in the South was defined by the intimate daily realities of slavery, particularly within the household and plantation systems. The plantation system was more than just an economic engine. It was a social world unto itself. At the top of Southern society stood the planter class, the wealthy families who owned dozens, sometimes hundreds, of enslaved people. Their wealth and political influence gave them outsized control over Southern culture and politics. For planter class women, the expectations were contradictory. They were supposed to be the moral center of the home, pious and submissive, embodying ideals of femininity. Yet within the plantation household, they wielded authority. Mistresses were expected to manage domestic affairs, supervise enslaved workers in the kitchens and fields, and enforce discipline. Many received enslaved people as gifts when they were children, sometimes even as infants. This practice instilled a sense of ownership and control from the very beginning of their lives. Formerly enslaved people, interviewed decades later in the 1930s, recalled mistresses who could be just as cruel, calculating, and business-minded as their husbands. In fact, some enslaved people remembered women as the harsher disciplinarians. The romanticized image of the Southern belle hides this reality. Behind the lace dresses and polite manners was a class of women deeply implicated in the brutal machinery of slavery. It's important to stress that white women were not merely auxiliaries to slavery. They were slave owners in their own right. Court records, wills, and bills of sale confirm that women bought and sold enslaved people, managed financial transactions, and even pursued legal cases to defend their ownership. Historian Stephanie Jones Rogers argues persuasively that white women actively shaped the institution of slavery. Far from reluctant participants, they often sought to strengthen their own economic independence through slaveholding. Families trained daughters in the management of enslaved people, teaching them how to issue commands, discipline, and extract labor. This reality complicates our understanding of gender roles in the South. While women were denied political rights, they nevertheless occupied a position of racial dominance that granted them profound authority over enslaved lives. One of the most troubling aspects of planter-class women's power lies in the realm of sexual exploitation. The dominant narrative of slavery focuses on the abuse of black women by white men, a horrific truth that cannot be overstated. But the reverse, though less discussed, also occurred: the exploitation of black men by white women. Evidence is scarce, in part because both enslaved men and white women had reasons to remain silent. For enslaved men, speaking out could mean torture or death. For white women, such admissions would violate the myth of their moral purity. Yet accounts do exist. Harriet Jacobs, in her autobiography, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, describes planter daughters who coerced enslaved men into sexual relations. Other testimonies from formerly enslaved people confirm that this was not uncommon. These encounters were never truly consensual. Enslaved men had no power to refuse. A mistress could easily destroy them with a single accusation. Even the appearance of mutual attraction must be understood within the context of coercion, domination, and survival. Why did planter-class women engage in such abuses? Scholars suggest multiple factors. Some point to boredom and isolation. Plantation life could be monotonous, and elite women were often confined to domestic spaces. Others emphasize the frustrations of patriarchy. While women were subject to their husband's control, they could assert dominance over enslaved people. Sexual exploitation may have offered a twisted sense of agency, a way to exercise power in a society that otherwise restricted them. Yet we must be clear, whatever the motivation, these actions were abuses of power. Enslaved men were stripped of choice, forced into degrading situations, and left with deep scars. This was not liberation for white women, but another layer of violence within slavery. An especially cruel dimension of these dynamics was the threat of accusation. If an enslaved man resisted, a white woman could claim he attempted rape. In a culture steeped in racist myths of black male sexuality as dangerous and predatory, such an accusation could be a death sentence. Lynchings and public executions were often justified on these grounds. Thus, planter-class women wielded not just their personal authority, but the entire patriarchal system of white supremacy as a weapon. Their vulnerability in relation to white men could be flipped into power over enslaved black men, with devastating consequences. Sexual exploitation was only one form of abuse. Planter-class women also engaged in physical violence. Testimonies describe women whipping enslaved men, starving them, or devising elaborate punishments. Far from being naturally nurturing, many mistresses enforced discipline with a cruelty that rivaled or even exceeded their husbands. This challenges the notion, sometimes repeated in older histories, that women acted as moderating influences on male brutality. In truth, white women were fully capable of inflicting pain and asserting authority through violence. The most infamous example of female cruelty is that of Madame Delphine LaLaurie of New Orleans. In 1834, a fire at her mansion revealed a secret attic where enslaved people were chained, mutilated, and tortured. Witnesses reported bodies scarred, broken, and starved, living victims alongside the dead. LaLaurie's actions shocked even her contemporaries. She fled New Orleans, her reputation in ruins, and her name became synonymous with sadism. While her case was extreme, it illustrates the potential for violence within the hands of elite women. Behind closed doors, far from public scrutiny, enslaved people were utterly vulnerable. While LaLaurie became infamous, countless other cases went unrecorded. The Federal Writers Project interviews provide glimpses into this hidden world. Formerly enslaved people recalled mistresses who beat them mercilessly, withheld food, or used them as pawns in household disputes. Some remembered being punished more harshly by mistresses than by masters. In one account, a formerly enslaved man described how his mistress would order him to perform humiliating tasks for her amusement. In another, a woman recalled her mother being beaten by the mistress with a fire poker for failing to complete a task quickly enough. These stories reveal patterns of cruelty that were not exceptional, but woven into the daily fabric of plantation life. For enslaved black men, the abuse they endured from planter-class women carried deep psychological consequences. They lived in constant fear of punishment, of humiliation, of false accusations. Their masculinity, autonomy, and dignity were systematically stripped away. Even in situations that appeared consensual, the imbalance of power was so vast that they could never be free participants. This legacy is rarely discussed, but its impact resonates. The silencing of these experiences has contributed to the erasure of Black men's suffering within slavery's sexual politics, leaving an incomplete understanding of history. Confronting this history forces us to rethink our assumptions. It challenges the idea that white women were somehow innocent bystanders in slavery. It also disrupts narratives that portray them only as victims of patriarchy. In truth, they occupied a complex,